Ambetigan reduchinus, morolai arti morsirio l'arros, agrimna nauste valiririna, gobedia galcani,
So, part 2 of this fascinating subject, which is negative energies and how they're made. So I've given you the example of a simple case already, and what I'm going to do now, I'm going to give you a personal example of one of my healing works, and this one was actually done in northwest Spain. And I was working for a client, and I was aware before I was working for this client, because of the client's relative who had explained the situation, that it wasn't only she that needed the work, there was something going on in the family. And this was spanning 2 continents, and this definitely involved one person that actively and consistently set fire to people in the attempt to burn them to death. So I knew straight away this is going to be a serious one, there was no question about it. So I'm going to just focus on the case, and then I'll deconstruct it for you afterwards. That's the best way. So I was prepared to do stage 1 of the USR, as usual, negative energy release. Started to do the work, and the very first thing that I became aware of is I could see the size of this entity. It was massive. It was huge beyond belief. I'd never encountered anything so massive. And I didn't understand what was going on, and of course I'm always working with my guides and my helpers. And so we looked into it, we went deeper, and what I discovered is as follows. This wasn't a negative energy, this was actually many thousands, at least 10,000 and possibly more. And that this was actually a very old conglomeration of negative energies, and they have been around for a very, very long time indeed. We're talking about many, many generations. I'm not sure it's 1,000 years, but certainly many hundreds of years that this had persisted for. And it had been passed down the family line from parent to child. And let me just add that little detail, because that's what I haven't explained in film number 1. 2 really important ways that you can have these negative energies passed on to you is through the family line, that you are being born and you get given them through the mother or through the father, passed on ancestrally. That's a very important one. Another one of fantastic significance, particularly to all practicing shamans, the other way that these negative energies can be passed on is through sexual activity. A practicing shaman who does not protect themselves when engaging with sex with a new partner, well, I know 1 or 2 shamans have made that mistake, and I'm not one of them. You don't want to do that. So let's get back to it. Sorry for the deviation. So many thousands of negative energies, they were conglomerated together into this mass of blackness. And I wanted to know why. It's the most obvious thing. They've been around a very, very long time. Why? And this is the answer I received. Going back to the time when they were originally formed, due to the deaths of the people all those generations ago, in those days, the way that shamans used to process these entities is they used to consign them to a hell realm. And the hell realm, unsurprisingly to me who understands these things, was in the earth. Now, I've made this clear in another film. It's really important in releasing negative energies. They must never be sent into the earth. That is a crime against the Mother Earth, and it is completely unacceptable to the energies. The only acceptable place to send them is up and away and out into the cosmos. And with my negative energy release, they all go to the realm, which is their heaven dimension. And we do this in love. The whole process is done through love. Very important. There's no hostility, there's no anger, there's no hatred, there's no retribution, there's no revenge. It's all done through love. Very important distinction. So there we were, loving this huge conglomeration of negative energies up through the blue vortex to the heaven dimension. And there was this resistance, and they told us this is what it was all about. We banded together to prevent ourselves from being consigned to the hell realms under the earth, which shamans in those days were doing as a routine. Now, I explained to them what I did, and you can imagine what they did. They took no bloody notice whatsoever, of course. And in their shoes, I wouldn't have listened to me either. So then something truly extraordinary happened. It was probably the first time this ever happened. At this point, I'd been working hard and consistently for more than 2 years. I forget exactly how many. What happened is that 2 former negative energies left their heaven dimension, travelled through the blue vortex and popped their little selves out into the scene, which is me, plus the guys, plus the helpers, plus this huge conglomeration, and they merged with them and they had a communication. And that's what did it. Because they communicated with these beings, many thousands, and they knew that they were being told the truth because it was their own kind. And they explained exactly what was going to happen to them if they were to take the leap. And to trust the love. A very difficult thing for a being that is in its essence negative, because of course love is something to be frightened of, generally speaking, but no, they went for it, they did it. And so that's what happened. So there was an agreement, they would be willing to go. But then this is a bit I had not expected. Bearing in mind I was doing this work on my own, with my guides and my helpers, but no fellow shamans to help me, in a foreign country actually. And it was rather like, if you can imagine, like a superhero type figure walking to Cape Canaveral, where they're going to send off a Saturn V rocket into the sky, and they grab hold of the bottom stage of the rocket and they start going. It felt like that. It really felt like I was lifting this impossibly hugely heavy weight, and it required so much energy from me, all the guys and all the helpers, and we strained and we struggled and we were moving it by millimeters. And thank God I was tuned into what is so important in all shamanic work. Unbending intent means we get the result. Unbending intent means we get the result. Unbending intent means we get the result. We just kept on and on and on until finally there was this most minute amount of acceleration. And then it started to accelerate more and more until suddenly gone. And that was it. And that was one of the most melodramatic experience I've had of releasing negative energies. And afterwards, the friend who was with me took one look at me and said, "You're going to need to lie down now, aren't you?" You're darn right I'm going to need to lie down. Normally after healing work, that's not what I need to do, but in this particular occasion I most certainly did. Okay, so that's the story. Now let's just break it down as to what's going on here. We now have the phenomenon that it is possible for these simple single negative energies to conglomerate into large numbers. This, in my opinion, represents one of the most difficult issues we have as human beings in terms of what people refer to as evil. I've been reading a book very, very recently, so I'm going to do a huge skip to like 48 hours ago when I finished this book. And there's the title, and there's the author. And this is the author is the guy who was the head of the United Nations in the Sudan in 2004 during the Darfur crisis, which you may or may not remember. At that time, many people were being slaughtered and treated in the most horrific way imaginable and beyond your imagining, to be quite honest. And I've read the book. I didn't want to read it, didn't want to take it out of the library, and I knew I had to. It was essential for my learning, as I can communicate to you the things I go through and what I learnt. And it ties in with other experience I've had as well, and read about and studied about. So in a place where utterly horrific things are happening in an institutionalized way, you can bet your bottom dollar that one of the things that's going on is that simple entities have conglomerated together to form an entity with much greater power. And there has to be a common bond, doesn't there? Of course it does. The kind of common bond I'm talking about now is the desire to inflict pain on human beings, and especially the innocent, and especially the female gender. That's the one I'm focusing in on this particular example. So what was common activity, and no one knew about it until this man, who lost his job and almost lost his life, braved got his courage together and shared this information with the world's media. This is what was going on at that point. It's a province in the west of Sudan, and this was orchestrated deliberately, and this is why he was in so much trouble, and it involved the government and militias. So it's a part of the Sudan where there were villages that were Arab, and there were villages that were black African. And at a high level it was decided that the black Africans were going to be exterminated. It was Project Human Extinction, which you've heard about through so many sources, the obvious David Icke, Chris Thomas, you know all these sources. So this is just a little tiny microcosmic example of Project Human Extinction in action. So the government provided the Russian Antonov transport aeroplanes. Very simple. All they did, they had oil drums full of a highly combustible fuel in the wick, and they would fly over the villages and they would throw the oil drums out the back of the aeroplane, and they would fall and they would set fire to the people's homes. That was stage one. Stage two was when, and they have a name, they're called the Janjaweed, that's the name of these militias. They would arrive on horseback with their armaments, and the people would be now running out of their homes and fleeing for their lives, and these guys would just tear into this area and they would shoot everyone they could find. And then they would arrive at the place, and those people that were still alive, that weren't actually bombed to death or shot to death, would all be rounded up. And if you're at all squeamish, this is where it comes a bit difficult, but nonetheless, this is the material we have to deal with. This is the planet we live on. This is what's going on. And I regret to inform you that such things I'm about to describe are going on today. You need to know that. So all the women of all ages, which includes girls, obviously, are rounded up and forced to take a certain position in a line. The sons and the husbands of these women are forced to watch. And then these militias take turns to repeatedly rape all the females in the line. And this is done in an industrial manner. And the taunts which are used is, you are now making many Arab babies. Now, when I read this, you can imagine this is really difficult stuff to read. It's difficult to hear about, isn't it? It certainly is. Very, very painful. Well, yes, let's just bring this in. I wasn't going to mention it, but it seems like it has to come into the film. What was so clear is that when you read this account, and I'll stress, Chief of the United Nations at that point, not someone whose opinion you can dismiss lightly, it was very, very clear that the degree of orchestration and efficiency in the extermination of these people was scary. Because some of these countries are not very well known for being organised or efficient. When it comes to the distribution of aid, there seems to be all this corruption gets in the way. But in terms of actually extermination of human life, suddenly everything seems to fit in very easily. That was really disturbing to realise how human beings can be coerced into an almost inhuman level of efficiency in terms of doing something so ghastly. So from the worm's eye view, it is just completely unacceptable, disgusting, revolting and all the rest of it. This is true. And I struggled to see things from the eagle's eye view, because as an empath I could identify with the women who gave the guy testimony, which was then corroborated by aid workers actually in these villages, who then watched these people sweep in, and all these horrific atrocities were done right in front of their eyes while they stood there unarmed, unable to do anything to stop it from taking place. It is that serious. The first thing I did is I went into, I'm a human being and I'm in distress because I'm an empath and I'm hearing about this very, very hard. And eventually I managed to switch my shamanic hat on, so to speak, and I tuned into what's going on, and I could see the faces. I mean, this is a book, but I could see the faces, and there's something I need to explain to you about a person that's really taken over by these demonic forces, these negative energies. There's a certain grin or smirk or look in the eyes, and it's cruelty, it's the enjoyment of cruelty. That's what I pick up with these things, and that's what I could see was going on. So what you have here is a situation that you've got a super entity or a super demon, and that is controlling the head of the government, and there's another super demon which is controlling the head of this militia, and they are able to manipulate all the other players into a state of compliance. This is what they do. Remember what I said, in England, in Britain, 75% plus of all people contain negative energies. So let's just imagine how many of the percentage of the population of that particular country are going to be containing them. Most of them seems like a fair guess, doesn't it? Yes, of course it does. So these people are being manipulated by these super entities which are switching on and ramping up the powers of these more minor entities and causing these people to do things that in their right minds they would never conceive of doing. Because obviously the people's brains are switched completely off. They're on autopilot. These people are perpetuating these war crimes. There's no question about that. And that's just one little microcosmic example, because you can go to many other parts of the world and you'll see the same thing. You'll see a relatively small number of human beings that are completely under the dominion and control of these super entities. Another example to think about is Transylvania and vampires as a historical aside, just to throw that in there, just to give you something else to think about, the idea of institutionalized cruelty, historically, present day. So, this is starting to sound a bit disturbing, isn't it? So it's about time I threw in the Ace of Trumps on all this one, which is that all negative energies, entities and demons have their power only through one means. What they do, effectively, is they whisper to the person that they wish to influence. If the person is naive, gullible, ignorant, foolish enough to listen, then over time they start to take on what the person is saying. Yes, another example, the man who took hold of his 2-year-old daughter, and his wife watched him as he did this in Crete, and she saw a complete personality change take place in the guy's face and eyes, walks over to the balcony and drops the 2-year-old child out of the balcony to the child's death. Another example of somebody listening to these voices. That's what we're talking about. People in mental institutions, many of them have a diagnosis like schizophrenia. And what is it? Hearing voices. Yes, it's such a common thing. There's a way that you can go into a much more detailed exploration of this than is physically possible for me to do in this film, and that is to go and find an old second-hand place and get the DVDs of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel, and you will see all this played out in great melodramatic detail in a way which is done to be palatable for the cameras to make money, I know, but there's a lot of truth in those films. And this is revealed. This is what shamans know, and it's what they show you in those things too. It's the person's ability to listen and take on those ideas that's the real issue. So it's very important for you, if you're at all concerned about this, to distinguish between any thoughts which that doesn't feel like my thought. If you have a violent thought go through your head, you think, that's not mine. Well, you know what you do with it. Straight in the thought bin. It's a nice way to do things. You can just visualize you've got a little bin in the corner of your consciousness. Any thoughts that arise that you feel, that's not appropriate, in the bin. If the bin's full, throw it up into blue vortex, off they go with love into the dimension which is their heaven. Gone, dealt with, done. Don't allow these things to fester inside yourself. It really isn't worth it. So in terms of simple energy, negative energy release, one shaman is absolutely fine. In the case of more serious situations, this is when it can be very productive for shamans to get together and to work on these super entities. I was fortunate that I was able to handle that one of many thousands on my own. I've also worked together with 2 other shamans on a place which historically had a lot of negative energy going on, and we went back into time, into the space where that took place, and we did a massive release. We made use of a lot of plant spirits to help us, particular herbs we used to cleanse, incenses, that's what we used, nothing that we consumed ourselves, but incenses for the space. That was very important. So it was an incredibly satisfying piece of work, getting together with 2 other shamans and doing a clearing on a particular locality, making use of incenses. A Popanax, that's the name I was looking for. That was the incense that was particularly useful in that work, I seem to remember, together with some others. So to summarise and to draw this all into a conclusion, the first thing I want to remind you is that the power that negative energies, entities, demons, call them what you will, have, is the power to whisper into your ear and for you to listen and to start to take note and start to act upon what they say. You don't want to go down that road. You want to distinguish between what is you and what is an outside agency. You need to bin off those thoughts, find ways to get rid of them using visualizations, anything you like, and focus on practical matters. It's a really good way to keep yourself away from such thing. The person who has no employment, who maybe has enough money they don't need to go out and do anything in their day, these are the people that are most at risk from this. People without children, people don't have third dimensional reality pressing in on them. They need to be careful and not to listen to these voices and just kick them into touch, pay no attention to them. For those people who need the negative energy release, obviously go see a shaman. That's the answer there. And I say a big thank you to all the shamans and other energy healers in the world who do the work that you do. And there is another one. I knew there was another point. Exorcism. There are some exorcists that are very dubious characters, and I think that the best that you could say that some of these people are doing is just taking your money, and others of them are definitely putting these negative energies into the earth, which is a violation of the free will of the earth, and only perpetuating the problem for the future when these things manage to find the host. If it's just, you don't want to go there, you don't want to do that. So there are certain organised religions which practice exorcism. Some of these religions use this as an opportunity to actually abuse the human being. Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit by Jeanette Winterson is a beautiful example of a book where that is a case, institutionalised abuse of a person under the guise of so-called exorcism. So keep away from exorcism would be my general advice, and go to a reputable shaman that can do the work in a fraction of the time with no drama and no fuss. Thank you very much.